So listen to this. They'll tell you Isco fell off because he stopped working, because he lost his hunger, because football is ruthless and that's just how it goes. Yet the strangest part of the Isco story is that there was no explosion, no scandal, no one brutal injury that snapped the timeline in half. He didn't crash, he didn't burn, he simply faded, quietly, like football stopped leaving space for the kind of player he was. They will say Isco declined, that his intensity dropped, that he couldn't keep up anymore. But decline usually leaves fingerprints, a moment, a match, a mistake that changes everything. With Isco, there is none of that. No red card that broke trust, no injury that stole explosiveness, no public fallout with a manager that forced the door shut. When you look closely, the facts refuse to line up with the simple explanation. Because the truth is this: Isco did not suddenly become a worse footballer. His touch did not disappear. His vision did not fade overnight. What disappeared was the environment that once allowed his qualities to breathe. Football didn't turn against him violently. It simply evolved in a direction that stopped waiting for players like him. Isco was never a player built for chaos. He was built for control, for pauses, for moments where the game slowed just enough for intelligence to matter more than speed. He needed space between the lines, trust from the system, and teammates who understood that sometimes the most dangerous action is not the fastest one. For a brief moment, football still made room for that idea, and in that moment, he thrived. But modern football began asking different questions. Can you press for 90 minutes? Can you recover position instantly? Can you play vertically, relentlessly, without hesitation? And slowly, almost invisibly, those questions pushed Isco's answers out of relevance, not because they were wrong, but because the exam itself had changed. So this is not a story about laziness or lost motivation or wasted talent. This is a case about timing, about a footballer whose peak collided with the end of an era, a playmaker who arrived just as football decided it no longer wanted to wait, no longer wanted to pause, no longer wanted to admire control for control's sake. Which brings us to the real question this case file is built around. Did Isco decline as a player, or did football quietly erase the role he was born to play? For a brief moment, Isco didn't feel like a luxury. He felt like a necessity. At Real Madrid, there was a window, narrow, fragile, but very real, where the team didn't just accommodate him, it revolved around him. This was the version of Madrid that valued control over chaos, patience over speed, and intelligence over volume. In that system, Isco wasn't drifting between roles, he was the role. He operated between the lines like a conductor, not rushing the tempo, but deciding it. When others sprinted, he delayed. When defenders stepped out, he slid past them. The ball didn't move faster through him, the game made more sense. Madrid could breathe when Isco touched the ball, and for a while, that breathing room was everything. This was not a coincidence. It worked because the structure allowed it to work. Behind him were players who controlled space rather than attacked it recklessly. Around him were teammates who understood that possession wasn't about domination, but about preparation. Isco wasn't asked to press like a forward or run like a midfielder chasing shadows. He was asked to think. And when football asked him to think, he delivered. But even in that moment, there was a tension under the surface. Because Real Madrid was changing. The midfield was becoming less about creativity and more about control. Less about invention, more about management. The pauses grew shorter, the margins tightened. The system started demanding certainty instead of interpretation. And slowly, Isco's role became conditional. He was essential on certain nights against certain opponents in very specific contexts. He was no longer the default answer, he was a situational solution. The kind of player you trust when everything is stable, but hesitate to build around when the game becomes faster, sharper, more unforgiving. That's how it starts. Not with exclusion, but with hesitation. Not with rejection, but with doubt. Isco didn't lose his place because he failed. He lost it because the system stopped committing to the ideas that made him special. Madrid didn't abandon him overnight, they simply stopped waiting. And when a club like Real Madrid stops waiting, it's not personal, it's structural. It means the moment has passed, not just for the player, but for the type of football he represents.
What changed wasn't Isco's technique. It wasn't his intelligence. It wasn't even his physical condition. What changed was the space, and modern football has become ruthless in how it eliminates space. The position Isco belonged to was once defined by freedom, the free eight, the creative midfielder who lived between lines, who interpreted the game rather than executed instructions. That role survived on time, half a second to turn, one extra touch to feel the pressure, a brief pause to decide whether to accelerate or delay. For decades, football protected that pause. Then, almost without announcement, it stopped. Pressing didn't just increase intensity, it rewrote priorities. The game stopped rewarding players who slowed it down and started celebrating those who could restart it instantly. Verticality replaced rhythm. Repetition replaced interpretation. Every player became a runner first, a thinker second. And in that environment, the free eight became a risk. Isco needed the game to come to him. Modern football demands you attack the game before it arrives. The distances closed faster, the lines compressed tighter. The spaces he once navigated with ease were now crowded before he could even receive the ball. And when those spaces disappeared, so did the patience for players who depended on them. This is where the narrative gets unfair, because from the outside, it looks like the player is slowing down. In reality, the game is speeding past him. Isco wasn't being outrun by defenders, he was being outrun by systems. Systems that valued predictability over creativity, security over expression. In that new reality, coaches stopped asking what a player could give them on the ball and started asking what he could survive without it. Could he press for 90 minutes? Could he recover position instantly after losing possession? Could he fit into a structure that demanded obedience before imagination? And every time those questions were asked, Isco's answers mattered less than before. The role didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because football decided it was inefficient, too delicate, too dependent on conditions that modern football no longer wanted to create. And when the role died, the players who embodied it were left without a natural home. So when Isco began drifting from system to system, from manager to manager, it wasn't because he had lost his identity, it was because football had lost interest in protecting it. He was still the same player, but the game he was designed for no longer existed in its pure form.
Here's the twist that changes how the entire Isco story should be understood. Isco didn't decline first. The role he played did. By the time people started questioning his intensity, his fitness, his relevance, the verdict had already been written somewhere else, inside the tactical evolution of the game. Football had moved on, not from Isco the individual, but from the idea that a team should be built around someone like him. Because Isco was never meant to be a plug-and-play piece. He was never a specialist for one narrow task. He was an interpreter, someone who connected phases, slowed chaos, and gave meaning to possession. That kind of player only thrives when the system commits to him fully. And modern football no longer commits, it optimizes. So what looked like inconsistency was actually incompatibility. What looked like fading influence was really shrinking tolerance. Teams didn't stop trusting Isco because he failed them. They stopped trusting the conditions required for him to succeed. The margin for error disappeared. The patience disappeared. And once patience is gone, players like Isco don't get time to explain themselves. This is why his decline feels so unspectacular. There was no dramatic fall because nothing broke. The game simply stopped bending in his direction. And when football stops bending, players who rely on subtlety don't snap, they dissolve. Isco didn't lose his talent, he lost the argument that control is worth waiting for, that pauses can still decide matches, that intelligence can still outweigh intensity. Football didn't reject that argument loudly, it just stopped listening. And that's what makes this case uncomfortable. Because if Isco didn't fail, if the role itself was phased out, then this isn't a warning about one player's career choices. It's a warning about what football is choosing to value now and what it is quietly leaving behind.
To understand what happened to Isco, you have to stop looking at him and start looking at what football now chooses to reward. The modern game doesn't ask who can see the most, it asks who can do the most, the fastest, for the longest. Distance covered, duels won, pressing actions per 90. The language of football has shifted from interpretation to execution. This isn't accidental. It's the result of systems becoming stronger than individuals. Coaches are judged on control, not imagination. Risk is something to be minimized, not embraced. And creativity, the kind that slows the game down instead of accelerating it, is treated like a flaw that needs to be managed. In that world, players are no longer valued for what they add in moments of calm, but how they behave in moments of chaos. Can you sprint back after losing the ball? Can you press on trigger? Can you stay inside the structure even when instinct tells you to drift? These questions define careers now. And when football starts asking those questions, it quietly filters out a certain type of player. Not loudly, not cruelly, just efficiently. The kind of player who needs trust, who needs space, who needs the game to pause for half a second so intelligence can surface. Football didn't decide those players were bad, it decided they were unnecessary. That's why Isco's story feels familiar, even if his name isn't always mentioned. Because this isn't about one man, it's about a generation of footballers whose strengths belonged to a slower rhythm, a different logic, a different idea of control. When the rhythm changed, they didn't collapse, they were simply no longer central to the plan. Modern football doesn't hate artists, it just doesn't build around them anymore. And when the system no longer bends, the players who once shaped the game are forced to adapt, shrink, or fade into the background. Not because they lost quality, but because the game stopped asking for it. That's the uncomfortable truth behind this case file. Isco isn't an exception, he's evidence.
So maybe the right question was never whether Isco could survive modern football. Maybe the real question is whether modern football still wants players like him to survive at all. Because somewhere along the way, the game stopped protecting pauses. It stopped valuing players who could slow chaos instead of amplifying it. Football learned to press, how to compress, how to automate decisions, and in doing so, it made itself faster, stronger, and more efficient, but also narrower. Isco feels like the last echo of a certain idea. The idea that intelligence could dictate tempo, that control could be more dangerous than speed, that sometimes the most decisive action is the one that delays everything else. Those ideas didn't disappear because they were wrong. They disappeared because they were harder to quantify, harder to systemize, harder to defend under pressure. Maybe football will circle back. Maybe space will return. Maybe another generation will demand creators who don't sprint first and think later. Or maybe Isco represents the end of something, the quiet closing chapter of the classic Playmaker who lived between lines and made the game pause just long enough to reveal itself. If that's true, then Isco didn't fail football. He became its evidence, proof of what the game once allowed and what it no longer waits for. Not a warning, not a tragedy, just a transition, unfolding so quietly that most people never noticed it happening. And that leaves us with one final thought. When football evolves again, and it always does, will it remember how to protect creativity when it needs it? Or will players like Isco remain ghosts of an era the game chose to move past without saying goodbye?